In Luke chapter 15, we have some parables here. Jesus gave parable of the lost sheep, parable of the lost coin. Then we have several other things that are related to that. And moving even into chapter 16, he starts shifting gears. And it's important. There's some important information here that we want to look at. In chapter 15, the parable of the lost son is what John says. And I think that's a misnomer. It's unless we're talking about, see, there are two lost sons here. One of them realizes he's lost and the other one doesn't. The older brother is the one, really, I think, is the focus. At least it's shifting into that, because as we move into the next chapter, he's actually going to be talking more about leadership and the people who ought to be the people that are helpful the most influential, sometimes aren't doing things right. And so we're moving into chapter 16 with the unjust steward, and then the discussion here about heaven and earth and the nature of it in verses 14 through 18. And then we come to Rich Man and Lazarus, and that's what we're going to talk about this morning. This is all in the context of him dealing with people who are lost and the attitude that we should have toward them, toward those who are lost. That's primarily what he's talking about in both of these chapters. And so we should take it that way. But, you know, it struck me as I was sitting here thinking about it, kind of reviewing things in my head. Sometimes we get into our minds that what Jesus did was he loved and had compassion for the majority of people, and all that. That would be the ones that he looks around and he sees that they're like sheep in need of a shepherd. And then we see that he's really hard and harsh with the leaders and the religious elites, so to speak, of the day. And sometimes it's easy for us in the religious world to look around and say, you know, that's a metaphor for religion in general, that religion is bad. I had a friend that on Facebook the other day, he just posted out of nowhere, he says, religion is the root of all evil. And I thought, okay, now there are people who have done bad things in the name of religion. There's no question about that. There are bad people who have done bad things in the name of a lot of things. But religion in and of itself is not evil. In fact, we can read in the book of James of pure and undefiled religion before God. And so it matters how we behave, but you have to wonder, why is it that people come up with that mentality? A lot of that is actually coming from atheistic arguments that are given, and it's directed at the religious leaders because that's what Jesus did. And they'll key in on that. Jesus really rebuked the religious leaders. There's no question that he had a lot of rebukes going on with them, but that doesn't mean that was his focus. It's almost as if some people have said, well, as long as you're not a religious leader, you're fine. Everyone else is going to heaven, but not them. But remember, when Jesus was talking, and he was talking to the apostles, and he told them how many people would be saved, he didn't say that the majority of people would be saved. He said there would be few who found it. It's not going to be the religious leaders that are going to make it. That's not the reason they make it. The only people who make it are the people who put that as their primary focus in life. Jesus himself said that there would be few who found heaven. That's why he said that narrow is the way. And King James says straight is the gate. And we've often had pictures of, we think it's straight. It's probably winding, but straight means it's narrow and difficult. And there are times that we have to take a step back and remember that. Claiming to be a Christian does not guarantee that we're going to make it. And Jesus had a way of saying things to sober us up, so to speak. And we need that from time to time. We need to take a serious look at ourselves and ask some hard questions. Am I really going to make it? I talk a lot about the idea of having confidence in our salvation, and the Bible teaches us that. 1 John, the book of 1 John was written specifically to teach us to have confidence, but we can have misplaced confidence. We can be arrogantly confident, thinking that we've got it made. I know I'm going to heaven because, how good I feel. And so because of that, we have to be very careful and cautious. How I feel in a given moment has no relationship with how God feels. I'm not God. And when God looks at me, he sees someone. He sees someone who is a sinner who has been forgiven by the blood of Jesus. If that's the case, that's great. But it may not be the case. And so what you have in the religious world is a lot of people who have made assumptions based upon how they feel, that if I feel this way, of course, then God has to feel this way about me as well. And we know that's not the case in all cases. If that was true, then the majority of people would probably end up going to heaven. But Jesus said they wouldn't. That makes you wonder. And this parable was given, and I don't honestly know if this was a parable or if this actually happened. Some people believe that because of the nature of it, especially someone who is named, it's the only parable we have where Jesus actually named someone in it. So some people have said, well, this is actually what happened. But a parable is based upon, a parable is a story that it's different from a fable. A fable is an invented story that couldn't possibly have ever happened. It's when trees are talking to people and birds and trees are having conversations, that kind of thing. That's a fable. But a parable is different. A parable is Johnny Ramsey used to say, a parable is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. It's something that could have happened, and so whether or not this happened or not, it's still true in a sense because it's what could happen. And it's a warning for us, and that's why it's important to distinguish between a parable and a fable. And there are no fables. There's one fable in the entire Bible. The rest of them are parables. But this here is a parable, and it's possible that it's actually an event. So I want you to notice what it says. There was a certain rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, this is verse 19, and fared sumptuously every day. But there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, full of sores, who was laid at his gate, desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. So it was that the beggar died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried, and being in torments in Hades, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham afar off and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things, but now he is comforted and you're tormented. And besides all this, between us and you there is a great gulf fixed, so that those who want to pass from here to you cannot, nor can those from there pass to us. Then he said, I beg you therefore, Father, that you would send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may testify to them, unless they also come to this place of torment. Abraham said to him, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, No, Father Abraham, but if one goes to them from the dead, they will repent. And he said to him, If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rise from the dead. It's a very powerful passage. And it's something for us to see the contrast here that's going on. So here we have the contrast of lifestyle before and after death, or before death, in verse 19 through 21. This is the man who was the rich man, who was clothed in purple and fine linen. And it said, I love how it says this in the New King James. It fared sumptuously. I really don't know what that exactly means, except I know that he was a man who was very well off, and he enjoyed it. Now, we need to stop here and recognize the fact that there have been a lot of people in history who have had great things and had a lot of wealth and accumulated a lot of things, who were actually called faithful children of God. Abraham was actually one of those men who had great wealth. And so it's not the amount of wealth here, but the contrast is shown for the physical so that we can make the contrast in the spiritual as well. This is the man then who also had a beggar who evidently lived around his table and would come in, would at least be allowed to come in and eat the crumbs off the floor. It says that he was full of sores in verse 20, who was laid at his gate, this is at the rich man's gate, desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell off the rich man's table. And the dogs came and licked his sores. All right? So there's the contrast. Rich, well off, everything going for him. And then poor, he was so miserable and poor, he had sores all over his body, even he had no help except that the dogs would come and lick his sores to help heal it, right? Now, we need to be careful that we don't start making this a parable about rich versus poor. He is contrasting situations that they were in so that we can see after death the contrast that was there in the spiritual realm. Okay, so here, just like saying with rich people that it is possible for them to go to heaven, that there have been rich people who have been pleasing to God, it's also possible to say that just because you're poor doesn't mean you've got a free ticket to heaven. This is not a rich versus poor thing. And God has always been that way. He's never judged someone based upon how much income they had. I think sometimes we kind of feel like, well, as long as I'm poor, I give everything that I have away. I'm in huge debt, and I just can't even afford to hardly even pay attention, as I grew up hearing. I can't even afford to pay attention. That means I'm going to make it to heaven. No, it doesn't. Your physical comfort level does not determine whether or not you're going to make it to heaven. But so often we kind of make those assessments, right? So we need to be careful. Here's a something that I've learned from studying Old Testament prophecy and the prophets. You could see this very easily. Never judge your relationship with God based upon how well or how bad off your life is. It has nothing to do with your relationship with God. Job was a man of great faith, and he lost everything for a long time. He had pieces of his body falling off, and yet he still gave praise to God. Your condition in life has no bearing on your relationship with God. Now, how you choose to react to that condition will definitely make a difference in your relationship with God. So all of us have challenges that we face, and poor people have challenges that rich people don't have, and rich people have challenges that poor people don't have. Everyone alive is going to be tested to their limits. This is what humanity does. It forces us to become someone. And who we become is based upon how we decide to interact with the situations of our lives. That will determine what we become. It has always been that way. It always will be that way. And this, in a sense, is how this great time of our life, if we're lucky, we get 70 or 80 or 90 years, that life is the proving ground for who we really are and what we really want out of life. So I want to start off with that, talking about the reason the contrast here is so vivid is because he's showing physical things and making spiritual contrasts. So that's what we're looking at. Before death, and we have one who is miserable and one who is living it up. And then we have, of course, the fact that death comes, right? Everyone is equal in death. It doesn't matter how much we have. And this is not his point, but it is an important point. I think someone mentioned one time that they had never seen a hearse carrying a U-Haul. I actually saw a picture on the internet one time of a hearse carrying a U-Haul, but I know they weren't going to go bury it. And if they did bury it, what good does it do them, right? What good does it do you to accumulate all these things in life and because of that, ignore? Now, the implication of what he's saying here is this man had great wealth, and outside his front gate, there was a beggar who evidently for a long period of time was laid at his gate day after day. And what did the man do but give him his crumbs? He didn't have a heart of compassion to help that man. That's something that we could say about that rich man. His riches affected him in a way that should not have affected him. He should have easily used his riches to help that man. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 6 through 11 gives us a lot of instruction related to how we use the things that God has given to us. But also the very fact is the attitude that we should have toward the things, not as much as how we use them. Chapter 6 and verse 6, it says, "Godliness with contentment is great gain. We brought nothing into this world, and is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and clothing, with these we shall be content." Now, if Paul were writing this today, I believe he would say the exact same thing. But what would we say? With food and clothing and Wi-Fi and my iPhone and my iWatch and my car, we have a whole list of things. I'll be content with those. But he said, with food and clothing, I will be content. How content are we with the things that God has provided for us? In our society, it's all about the more, right? I got to have something else. And I said, there's nothing wrong with having stuff. But sooner or later, we have to realize that instead of having stuff, our stuff has us. Because we've got to work extra hours to have it. We've got to, it's, kind of the same old story of a man who works 90 to 100 hours a week so that he can afford a boat. Can't ever get out on the boat because he's working all the time. Is that how life is? Well, we can get our priorities mixed up, and then we forget to live, right? We think that there's one thing that we're supposed to do with our lives, and that is related to money, and that's certainly not what God wants. And so how do we view the things around us? We have to recognize that they're temporary, right? They're short-lived. I've never heard of someone on their deathbed, if they're lived to a long age, wishing they could have worked longer hours. Man, unless they're doing something that is more hours than preaching the gospel or something like that. But even then, there are limits, right? We recognize most people, if they have any regrets, what would those regrets be about? It'd be about their family, not spending enough time with them. It might be about not using their finances in the best ways. There are all kinds of things that people have regrets about, and it's usually related to how they interact with the decisions that they make in this world, whether they're good or bad. So coming back to Luke chapter 16, we need to recognize that all of us are equal in death, and we have to face this. And then we also have a contrast that comes after death. All right, so the contrast is before death, and then we have a contrast that's coming after death. And this is what we see here. First of all, we have Lazarus in verse 25, who is comforted, and it's very ironic. And look at what he says in verse 25. But Abraham said, speaking to the rich man who is in torments, he said, "Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things, but now he is comforted and you're tormented." So Lazarus, whenever he received his reward after his life, it's evident that this man lived in faith, or he wouldn't be in the position that he's in. And in spite of the fact that he had a lot of bad things happening to him, he still lived in accordance with God's will. And so now he is in a place of comfort. And now this other man who was living it up, not considering that his life meant anything beyond what he was living for at the time, is now in a place of torments. And here's an interesting thing about this, that I don't know if it's interesting as much as scary. We're going to be dead a lot longer than we'll be alive. And I don't mean that we're going to die and we're going to just sleep. The afterlife is a whole lot longer than this meager 60, 70, 80 years here. And what do we know about this 60, 70, 80 years? Some of the elderly people, I'm not counting myself there yet, tell me that once you get past 60 or so, it's just days become weeks, become years very quickly. I'm seeing that too. Have you noticed that? Man, in high school, it seemed like it took a week to get out of Monday first period. Since then, I can't keep up, right? So it's not just that we have 70 or 80 years, they are gone like that. And what good does it do us to waste our entire life running after things that actually don't even matter? And we face then a situation where we're running headlong and don't even realize we're running straight to a grave. And we fall into the grave, it's over, and what do we have to show for it for our lives? It depends on how you lived, right? Are you producing fruit that will produce itself into eternal life? Or are you squandering it, taking advantage of the opportunity, the now, living for now? So we have the one who was tormented during his lifetime, but he gets to spend the rest of eternity comforted. It says in the bosom of Abraham. That's just terminology that back in the day when in this time period, the way they would eat would be they would have a short table in the middle of the room, and I say short, it's probably a foot high, and they would have cushions all around, and they would often just lie down, and they would lie on one arm, and they would eat with their other hand, and they would usually use their food to sop up, like bread, sop up food and eat it. And they would kind of position themselves all around that table if there are a lot of them. And so what happens was you would have in this We see this actually with Jesus in the Last Supper. We would have someone who was next to you would be very close to you if there's a lot of people. So they didn't have chairs. They didn't have the concept that we have of, you keep your distance. This is how far you can come to me. Do not intrude my space. They would get all up in your space. And so they would lie it down and basically have their head right here. So your head is here and their head is here. And they call that being in the bosom of someone. That shows closeness. It shows relationship. That's the point. And so when he says he's in the bosom of Abraham, it means he is engulfed in the proximity with Abraham. And of course, at this time with the Jewish people, Abraham was not God, but he was one of the exalted ones. He's the father of their faith. And so that was the best place he could be. I don't know if it'd be the same way with us, with Abraham, although I would love to spend time with him. I think it would be more with Jesus, but he's not there. This is a place that we call the Hadean realm. He calls it Hades here. That's simply the realm of the dead. It's the waiting place. And there are characteristics of it that are similar to what's going to happen for eternity. So here is Lazarus, and Jesus actually, when he was on the cross, was talking to one of the men there, one of the thieves, the robbers that were there. He said, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." That's the same thing. So there's a paradise that's waiting for us. That's a waiting place for us to go to be in heaven with God forever. But whether we're in the Hadean realm or the eternal realm, it's all basically the same thing. We're going to have this, evidently, the same kind of comfort. And then we also have the other side of this with the torment. In fact, look at how it's described here in verse 23. It says, being in torments in Hades, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham afar off and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I'm tormented in this flame." He was just begging for even a drop of water. That's how bad it was. I don't know how spirits can feel flames. I don't know everything about this. But I do know that when it talks about flames of fire and being so tormented that you're so thirsty. Have you ever been thirsty? Your mouth gets dry and your tongue swells up a little bit and can't hardly speak. And some of y'all are wanting to go get water right now. And he's just begging for one drop. He says, "Sorry, it can't happen. There's a great gulf that's been fixed. No one can go there to you, and you can't come here from there. Here's a place of torment." That's scary. And not only that, if you think about it, what he's saying here is that there is recognition. I've had a lot of people ask me, what does the Bible say about whether or not we'll recognize our loved ones in heaven? Seems to me like we will. Here's an example of that, because even the man in torments recognized Abraham and was calling out to him, and recognized the poor man and recognized that he was with him and saw him. Even though he was afar off, he knew that he was there and was asking for help from him. So it seems to me like if they can see that in torments, they would also see that in paradise. And here's another part of this, and this is what he brings out here in this, what Jesus brings out, is the amount of regret that would be there. In fact, he said, this is what Abraham said. He said, "Son," in verse 25, "remember." Can you imagine what it would be like to miss heaven and to remember all the opportunities you had? That'd be the worst part of it to me. To remember all the opportunities, all the invitations. That's scary. I'm not trying to make everyone feel bad. I'm just saying we have to have some realization sometimes, right? We got to keep it real. And we have opportunity after opportunity. I knew a man one time, he said he believed, I don't know how he practiced this. He said, "I believe that every person should only hear the gospel once until everyone hears it." Now, theoretically, if that were the case, and you only heard the gospel one time, where would you be? How many times does God have to tell us before it's real? How many times does God have to invite us to follow him before he actually means it? How many times do we have to deny it before we finally walk into eternity having denied it once too many times, too often? I don't know how to answer that, but I thank God with all my heart that I didn't have just one chance. The thing is I don't know if this is your one chance or not. Here we have the contrast. Look at also the fact that it's protected in verse 26. The poor man was protected. He says, besides all this, between us and you, there's a great gulf fixed, so that those who want to pass from here to you cannot, nor can those from there pass to us. So we're protected. This tells me that when we're in heaven, there's no danger of us falling away. There's no danger of us coming out of that and going to hell. What that means is that somehow we're going to be protected. I don't know how. But I know God can arrange it and he can make it work. At the same time, this great gulf not only protects us, but it also reinforces the fact that the people who are lost, who are in hell, there is no escape. Verse 26, there's no one who can come out of there to us. There's nothing that you can do. Once you're there, you're there. No escape. So we have to ask ourselves where we are. Where do we want to be? I think it pretty well tells us. We pretty well know where we want to be, don't we? And we pretty well have an idea of whether or not we're putting the effort in to live it or not. Sometimes we just need some encouragement. But look at what he goes on to say, and he talks about the fate of other people in this section. For some people, it's too late for concern. And for this man, this rich man, it was too late for him to be concerned. And there is a time when the doors are shut. What are we going to do? It's too late. 27 through 29, he says, I beg you, therefore, Father, that you would send him to my father's house. I have 5 brothers, that he may testify to them, lest they also come to this place of torment. So now he started to be concerned about someone beside himself. And maybe for the first time in his life, he's concerned about someone besides himself. But it's too late. And he realizes that his brothers are going in the same direction he was going in, and he never bothered to say a word. He didn't care about them. He cared about himself. And now he's starting to regret that. Are there people in your life that you ought to be saying something to? And it's difficult. It's hard. Sometimes they don't respond very well. But we need to find our way of saying, listen, I'm concerned. There's some things happening. I think we need to have a discussion. I don't want to be in a place where I regret not saying something to someone. And that's a very important idea. And this really comes back down to a test of the hearts. Verses 30 and 31. We have an obligation to say things, but ultimately, all of us have to make up our own minds, right? This is something that I've run into with wives with their husbands. It happens the other way around too, but I've run into it more with wives with their husbands. What can I do to make my husband want to go to church? Nothing. There's nothing you can do to make him want to go to church. You can encourage him, sure. You can set the right example, sure. 1 Peter chapter 3 tells us that. You set the right example, and he may come around, but you can't make someone want to do something. That's a fruitless task. You might encourage them and show them what they would gain by it. Sure, you can do that. You can encourage them and maybe even teach them some things and help them see some things. But really, when it comes down to it, we, each of us, are responsible for making the decisions of our lives. And we each of us, this life is a test of what we really want. Do you really want God or not? Look at verse 30. He said, no, Father Abraham, but if one goes to them from the dead, they will repent. And he just convinced, listen, I know. See, if somebody goes to them, they raise from the dead and they go talk to them, they're going to believe. And he says, no. Verse 31, if they don't hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded though one rise from the dead. It's not the miracles that cause people to make their change. It's their heart. If they're not going to listen to the Bible, when it says very plainly what to do, they're not going to listen even if someone was raised from the dead and came to them and said, you better pay attention because I've been there, I know what it's like. It doesn't matter. In fact, Jesus proved it because he was raised from the dead and he told people, and for 2,000 years, people have been told that there's been one who was raised from the dead who's telling us exactly what we need for life and godliness in order to be with him in heaven forever. And the majority of people reject it because they don't believe this. It's a test of the hearts. And your heart is tested today. Your heart is being tested. It's being tested not just by this sermon, but by the very things that you are facing in your life. You're being tested to see what you really want. Do you really want to follow God and be with him forever? Do you really want it? Because when you are put to the test, we're not talking about some trivial matter where you stump your toe now and then. We're talking Satan is involved in this. The forces of evil powers are involved in this, that God himself has arranged it so you will face your greatest challenges to see if you really want to be there. And if you want to be with God in heaven, you will recognize that nothing else matters. If I have to give up everything in my life just so I can be with him. That's what he's looking for. That's why he said, he who does not take up his cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. If you're not willing to give everything up for Jesus, it doesn't mean that you're going to live the rest of your life in poverty. It could mean that. But even if that were the case, isn't 20 or 30 or 40 or 80 years of misery trading in for an eternity of comfort? Isn't that worth the cost? If you can't say yes, then it shows where your heart is. So this message this morning is designed to help us face reality, and I hope I've done that a little bit, and that you can make some decisions. If you need to make a decision to put on the Lord Jesus in baptism, we're here for you. We want to help. Or maybe you just need to make some changes. It could be public confession of sin. If you've sinned publicly, let everyone know, I've done this, and I'm tired of living this way, and I want to make a change. And the greatest thing about that is we are all here to support you. We've all been there. We've all had sin in our lives, and we want to help. Or maybe it's something that you're just struggling with privately, and you need to just make some changes in your pew. Let's do that. If there's any way we can help, please come as we stand and sing.